Illinois lawmakers are considering some big reforms, and votes could come as early as January. That's next on Capitol View. Hello, and thank you for tuning into this week's edition of Capitol View. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn from Illinois Issues magazine, and braving the wintry weather today to chat with us about Illinois politics is Statehouse columnist Mike Lawrence. Mike, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Bob Gough, editor of QuincyNews.org. Bob, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And Ray Long, Statehouse bureau chief for the Chicago Tribune. Ray,
good to be here.
Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Lawmakers are considering some pretty large reform packages this week. They're having committee hearings mainly in Chicago to talk about a lot of issues that have been on the table for years. We're looking at workers' comp reform, we're looking at Medicaid reform, and also education reform. First of all, let's talk a little bit about why these issues might be coming up right now. Ray, would you like to start us off?
Well, one of the things is that Republicans have not been willing to go along with a lot of the various bonding proposals. For example, there is a proposal that would put about $4 billion into the current budget year. That is just for operations expenses, but it would also pay for pensions. That's where it's targeted. But if you don't get that money for pensions, therefore you will have to cut elsewhere around the budget because you'll have to pay those pension funds. So when you've got that hanging out there and you need to get Republican votes, you have to come around with something Republicans want. Republicans have pushed for lesser costs on workers' comp and to cut back some of the fraud in Medicaid, which is also a costly program. It rises every year. Then we have this old-time issue of school reform. Everybody wonders about what's equitable. Everybody wonders about whether anybody's getting enough. Everybody wants to have property tax relief, but there's a hard nut here to crack to get something that's equitable for everybody when some schools get $20,000 per pupil and other schools pay $10,000.
Well, and as you said, it is a hard nut to crack. All three issues are, but legislators have created a pretty escalated timeline for this. They're looking at early January, possibly for votes. Is this a genuine effort? Is this a political effort just to get votes in a borrowing bill? What do we think so far?
I don't think we're going to know until we see this unfold. Many times it's difficult to tell exactly what the motivation is until you see what the outcome is. These three areas are mega areas, and there are a lot of moving parts involved here to education reform, workers' comp, and Medicaid reform, and whether everything can be put in line. You can get the votes to approve those measures, and just how they'll be packaged with issues regarding the state's finances remains to be seen.
Well, and the Medicaid and workers' comp reform is really being sold as a job creator, that it'll help businesses out. There's a lot of talk that businesses are leaving Illinois because these costs are too high. Bob, is there much to back that up? Are we seeing businesses not taking an interest in Illinois because of workers' comp possibly, or possibly leaving the state?
Yeah, I mean, this week there was a study came out that showed that Illinois was, I think, number 2 in job. I think they said Illinois was ranked 2nd in the amount of jobs fleeing the state, and those were the biggest issues. The workman's comp was the big issue with that. But I think when you're talking about the local level that most people look at, they look at when they get that property tax bill, that schools who constantly say we need more money, we need more money. In Quincy, the Quincy Public Schools make up about 55% of the property tax bill, and people, they want to support education, but they look at that number continuing to rise. And the governor says, he has a mandate for income tax, for an income tax increase. Is property tax relief going to come hand in hand in that? I just don't think the public's not going to accept one without the other, I don't think.
When looking at the education reforms, what we're talking about mainly has to do with teacher seniority. Right now, seniority plays a really big part in who gets to keep their job if there are layoffs, and what your choices are as far as your employment if you're a teacher. And tenure is one of the other issues that's coming up quite a bit, it looks like, under this. These issues seem to play out kind of differently when you look at Chicago and you look at downstate. Since we have people that have represented all areas of the state, can we discuss that a little bit about, downstate people look at Chicago's unions and say, oh, their unions are awful, and Chicago probably thinks the same of some of the downstate unions. So how does this play out across the state?
Well, it's a tough knot. No union wants to lose members, and when you fight for the person who's at the lower rung of the ladder, then you are fighting to keep that person there so that the next person isn't the lower rung of the ladder. So what it amounts to is a long, long struggle to hang on to people's jobs, to keep them and protect them, versus trying to make sure that the children of our state are getting the proper education that they need. And the unions don't give a whole lot in that. They understand the concept that bad teachers should not be teaching children, but when it comes to their own members, they fight tooth and nail.
They also look at the costs in schools with administrator salaries going up at a faster rate than teacher salaries. They look at the number of administrators per capita going up faster than the number of teachers going up. We see classroom sizes that are rising while we see the number of administrators rising across the state. We're not seeing more teachers. I mean, Quincy, over the last 2 years, has laid off a lot of teachers. They've closed a couple of schools. And of course, they're still down millions of dollars from the state, whereas the district has made most of those cuts in the teachers who are just about to get tenure. I mean, they're the ones, if you're in that third year, getting ready for that fourth year and hoping you get tenure in that fourth year, those are the ones who are getting the bulk of the layoffs right now. But the districts are not making the equitable amount of cuts at the administrative level. They have made administrative cuts, but the cuts have come much more from the rank and file teachers who have not received tenure than the number of administrators or people out of the central office.
So maybe part of the solution would be to include administrators in this reform. They're really not targeted at all in what is going around now. That's the draft bill. It could change a lot. But
yeah, absolutely. There needs to be some sort of equity. You know, the union, when they're having these cuts and these negotiations, they need to say, look, if we're going to make this percentage of cuts, then this percentage of cuts also has to come from the board office. I'm not talking a dollar amount, because obviously when a school district's budget is 80% salaries and mostly teachers, of course most of those cuts are going to come from there. But I think what they're looking for is the equitable percentage. If you're going to cut 10% from that, from the rank and file teachers, then they're going to want at least 10% from the administrative pool of money as well.
And teachers' unions are typically a constituency for Democrats. The Democratic Party has been upsetting the unions as of late with pension reform as well. Mike, why do you think the Democrats are a little willing to upset their constituencies recently?
Well, there's some speculation that Speaker Madigan was not pleased with the way teacher unions supported some of his members or didn't support some of his members when they were running for re-election. But I think beyond that, Speaker Madigan, President Cullerton, they made sense that you need elements like education reform, Medicaid reform, in order to improve the jobs climate in Illinois. Again, getting back to the possible linkage on these issues, people in the business community with whom I've spoken over the years are concerned about the quality of the workforce, what kind of graduates they're getting out of, particularly out of high schools. They're concerned about Medicaid. As Ray indicated, that's been an escalating part of the budget for some time. And workers' comp, they're worried about the Illinois having a competitive disadvantage there especially with our neighboring states. And then the fiscal situation. We've got a horrendous deficit. The business community does not like uncertainty, and they're not in love with paying higher taxes now, but they're more worried about what kind of taxes they're going to pay down the road if we don't get this thing in order. So there is linkage there, and I think it would be very difficult to get all of this put together. But if you could, I think it'd be good governmentally for several reasons. I think we need reform in all those areas. We do need to take the major steps to get our fiscal house in order, but it would also be a political cover for Republicans to come on and support revenue increases as long as they were combined with reforms in these other areas.
Yeah, Republicans have wanted to see a lot of these things for years. I almost feel like the way you're framing this, though, that this reform package, all these issues together, is almost a wish list for the business community. Would you? Is that a fair characterization of this?
Well, I don't. It may be a wish list for the business community, and they're not going to get everything that they want. But I do think that we need to look at the business climate in Illinois, and what I'm suggesting here is that Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton, along with the Republican leadership, understand that we've got to do something about that. One of the things I think that's unusual here is this is really coming from the legislature. We haven't really seen Governor Quinn involved in this to any significant extent. And typically, when you're talking about possible reforms in these major areas, you would have the governor, if not involved up front, pretty much involved once it got going. And I think that's pretty unusual.
Yes, Quinn's been laying low a lot in the last few weeks. He hasn't publicly commented on a lot of these issues. And one of the things that is interesting about the teacher reform is that it would change contracts that have already been achieved through collective bargaining, and there's a section of it that says that any of these reforms that are addressed in collective bargaining, that bargaining would then be voided. Quinn has been doing a lot of negotiation with public employee unions. How might this affect our ability to negotiate as a state with employee unions if the state can just go back on some of those promises in the future?
Well, I think it's going to be something that unions will be up in arms about, because if you can pass a law then that voids contracts, you'll end up in court, but you'll also have a lot of unions that will just be fired up to try to make these changes or stop these changes before they get in place. So they'll be lobbying their local legislators like crazy, and they'll lobby both houses, and they'll lobby the governor like crazy too. And the governor listens a lot to every side, and sometimes that's why he comes out like he's changing his mind, because he's listening to a lot of different folks, and then he does change his mind sometimes. So these things can really happen. Mike hit on a good point here, that it's coming from the legislature too. I think that they could, if they're successful, they could look toward the pension deal that they did last spring, where they rammed it through in a couple of days. They decided what they wanted. They had the two chambers lined up. They got it through, and they put it on the governor's desk. They ended up taking what they could pull together, and everybody was in concert. So they may have a pattern in place to go ahead and shove things through quickly, but it'll be quite a show if they can do it. You kind of see the same thing on the national level, where you see all these don't ask, don't tell, and other issues coming up right now at the end of the term here. There are lame ducks in place in the legislature. Those are often people that can have a vote that goes up for grabs. In other words, they might vote for something that they might not normally vote for, but they may do it because they think, well, I do think this is the right thing to do. I don't have to face the populace again at the voting box, and so therefore I'll vote this way.
Well, we saw that happen in Illinois, definitely,
Right.
during the lame duck session. Looking at what's going on the federal level during lame duck, one of the big issues that seems to be getting solved, we're not sure yet, is the compromise on extending the Bush tax cuts as well as extending unemployment benefits. And Ray, I think you had some information on how that might affect Illinois if it does, in fact, make it through the House.
Well, right, and I might have to refer to some notes here, but there are issues here that if this tax cut package or this overall tax compromise really that goes through Congress, that has gone through the Senate, if that goes through, then Illinoisans, they have calculated in their spend that as many as 6.5 million Illinoisans will not see taxes go up themselves, that they will pay a lower level in taxes, and that's a major boost, they think, that will help the economy. They also throw in a variety of other things that try to focus on job creation, and there's a litany of things that they go through. This is all partially true and partially a sales job here, but as Barack Obama himself said, they have to try to get something through here to extend unemployment benefits to people. They have to try to find ways to spur the economy, and these are the types of deals that happen in a compromise. You get a little bit that you want, you get a little bit that you don't want, but everybody gets something that they want, and you vote for it.
Well, and I think there's definitely been strong arguments made that not doing these things would possibly damage the economy. Maybe not as strong of arguments that it will actually create jobs in the future, but it kind of goes back to what Mike was saying about this promise of stability being necessary in order to make businesses happy. So looking at that a little bit with these reforms, do you think the business climate would be willing to maybe pay a little bit more in taxes now for some of these stability promises in the future if some of these reforms are made?
I do.
Yeah.
Based on, again, on the conversations I've had with leaders in the business community, but they make it clear they want the reforms. And the other aspect is that they would like to be involved, of course, in which taxes and fees might be increased. And I think it's worth listening to the business community. I'm not saying just because they ask for it, they ought to get it. But there may be ways in which we can increase taxes on business overall, but do it in a way that will be least negative to the business community. I've talked to people like Tom Johnson, who's the president of the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois, and he believes that there are ways in which you could develop a package in which business would end up paying more, but it would do it in a way, again, that would be least harmful to job creation.
So we're probably looking at a new version of a tax plan, possibly. The bill that passed in the Senate would expand the sales tax based to services. I'm assuming that's something businesses probably aren't thrilled about.
Well, again, I think it depends on what the package is and whether they feel like their concerns have been heard. Again, it does not mean you roll over for business. We shouldn't roll over for business, nor for the unions or for any other entity. But we ought to do things that make sense. And part of determining what makes sense is to listen to different groups about what they really care about and to evaluate what they're saying. And if it makes sense, to try to accommodate them. If it doesn't make sense, then you don't accommodate them.
Listening, a novel idea in Illinois politics. Well, Quinn has laid low in the last couple of weeks as far as talking about some of these issues, but he's made some interesting staffing choices. He's brought back his former chief of staff, Jerry Starmer, which we might remember he resigned over some minor ethics infractions that came to light during the campaign. He said he didn't want to be a distraction. He is now returned, and Governor Quinn has also promoted Jack Lavin, who has been a longtime friend and they've worked together for many years, to his chief of staff position currently. These are decisions he probably couldn't have made during the election. They're a tad controversial. Lavin has some connections to Blagojevich in the past. I wasn't here for some of that, so those of you that were, can you explain a little bit what the connections are, why some people are up in arms, some people think it's a great choice?
Well, right. Lavin was appointed head of the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity under Blagojevich. He also had worked for Rezko, Tony Rezko, who is the fundraiser who was convicted basically in a shakedown scheme under while Blagojevich was in office in relation to Blagojevich fundraising. And so Lavin worked for him. There's a taint because of that people have. There are people who believe that Jack Lavin wasn't involved in the shenanigans in the Blagojevich administration, and he was a guy recommended or pushed by Quinn for that job, and that their ties are solid and clean, if you will. There are a lot of people who wonder about these endemic hiring fraud that the charges that Patrick Fitzgerald made throughout or right before the election in 2006, where he said several state agencies were involved in that kind of thing. There never really has been a solution to what actually he saw there.
Yeah. And this was the case. It was alleged that,
right,
that
it was alleged.
What was it, like $20,000 in a campaign contribution could possibly get you a job at the time?
Well, that's another piece of the equation too. But to hone in on this issue with Lavin, a lot of people think he's a very competent guy, and they think that he deserves a shot to be there. Quinn's been a loyalist, and Lavin's been a loyalist to him. Rezko had contributed some to Lavin's short Senate run, and there were a lot of, on the one hand this, on the one hand that. Quinn has had him as chief operating officer during his tenure as governor, and now he's moved him up to chief of staff. He's obviously satisfied with him, but that in a nutshell, in a rambling nutshell, I guess, is why we have some people saying one thing and others the other.
But you made a great point. This wasn't going to get done before the election because the commercials would have been out that Lavin was Tony Rezko's chief financial officer, and that would have been the headline. And so you're right. You know, Quinn had to wait until a cooling off period, if you will, before he can make that promotion. Because in Lavin's previous position, he wasn't escalated, if you will. This, of course, escalates him. So
I think that there's also a tad of racial politics involved in this too. Michelle Sadler, who was moved up from an agency directorship to the chief of staff position after Jerry Sturmer left, is popular, African American, did a good job. She's done a good job at her agency where she's going back to, and she gave another face to the administration during the campaign. I mean, I was up there in the chasing Quinn around Chicago, and she appeared at a lot of campaign events, or they were actually state government events where they're making announcements that were popular. But I guess in the intersection there, it gets a little hard to dissect. But she was at some
of running from the governor's office for re-election.
Right. So anyway, she helped solidify his base in the African American community.
Which he was having some trouble early on polling in the African American community. So.
Right.
I think there's a perception problem here, and I think Governor Quinn has decided that he'd rather have someone he trusts in that job, and that the perception problem is not as important as that the feeling that you can trust someone and that the person is capable. We'll see how it plays out. I mean, I think a lot of people have seen Quinn as being someone inept, managerially and not gubernatorial, that he has not grown in the job, and Some people have been critical that of the people he's had around him. They've been critical of him for not listening to whoever he had around him, and this is his chance and Jack Lavin's chance to show that they can govern effectively, and certainly better than what we've seen.
Well, and we had some sad news in Springfield this week. Springfield Mayor Tim Davlin was found dead this week. It was later determined that it was from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It was pretty shocking, not something that people were at all expecting to happen. So I'd like to just touch a little bit on Davlin's role in Springfield and some of the things that he's done working with the legislature over the years. Probably one of the biggest things that he has done recently was working on the police and fire pension reform bill. He worked pretty hard to help push that bill in Springfield. One of the other issues that's kind of come out of this, I guess, has been the state police's handling of the investigation and dealing with the press and the public. Ray, could you speak a little bit on that?
Well,
There's
sure.
been some controversy over it.
Right. So. There just hasn't been much information, and there should be. And in the first day, there was not even confirmation that there was a gunshot that killed him, and the information that came out was so Spartan, you could interpret it many different ways. I think the police have an obligation to be upfront with the public as far as they can. I can remember in previous administrations, I would have the cell phone number of the director of state police who would be able to tell me what's going on, specific details, and you don't see that in this administration, and you didn't see that with the Davlin investigation. I think the public was hurt by that. I think the public deserves to know more than what they told.
Not to even answer the basic question of who made the 911 call. I mean, that's pretty.
Right.
That's 101. But
Yeah.
they weren't even giving that, and and then you have the ISP director who descends from the mountaintop to hold this news conference, which he gives zero information. He should. Does he do that all the time? I mean, obviously not. So the news conference they had earlier, which the Springfield police chief was working with the ISP. Official, and basically the Springfield police chief said we're obviously going to move this because of who the mayor is, and that was a good transfer. But then after that, the information was gone. Nothing else. You weren't going to learn anything. And as Ray said, it's not the way to do business.
Well, and on that note, we are out of time. It was a frustrating and sad week for the city of Springfield. I'd like to thank my guests, Mike Lawrence, Bob Gough, I apologize for the mispronunciation earlier, and Ray Long. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn, and that's it for this week of Capitol View.